With the recent attacks on American and allied troops, the U.S. Navy said it was sending one of its more powerful nuclear-powered attack submarines to the Middle East. Now, to talk about this in more detail is the host of the Foreign Desk and our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, who joins us once again from the City of Angels, Los Angeles. Lisa, the deployment comes following an attack on U.S. personnel in northeast Syria, which injured 12 service members and killed a contractor. So what do you think is the main objective of the U.S. Navy sending this powerful submarine in?
Look, the objective is to say we are not going to take this and we are going to show up, which is the right thing to do. But juxtapose this with the podium talk of President Biden the day after these attacks on U.S. personnel, and he said we are not looking for an escalation, but there will be consequences. So it's interesting because on the one hand, obviously the Biden administration does not want another war. They never wanted any war, but meanwhile they got themselves into all of these different pickles. That is because of the weak foreign policy coming out of the West right now. There are consequences, right, Hal? And that's exactly what this shows us, that there are consequences when there's weak foreign policy. Our enemies will take advantage. But the fact that we're sending a submarine, that should be some sort of escalation, regardless of whether or not President Biden wants to admit it is one. It is a military escalation, and we're going to show that we will have presence there. Instead of pulling out of that region, we're getting further and more deeply involved, and that should send a clear message to our enemies that we are very serious and that we will not take any more attacks on our assets. Just want to point out, you mentioned this last week, and I mentioned it the week before that, but there have been 80 or more attacks on U.S. personnel in Iraq and Syria since the President Biden came into office. And I mentioned there's 33 or more attacks just since October of last year. So it's been very serious. And now I hope that this really is a deterrent of some sort.
Yeah, tensions escalating around the world. Lisa, as the world's eyes are on the war in Ukraine, it appears as though a war between China and Taiwan is imminent. China sent fighter jets towards Taiwan just days after House Speaker Kevin McCarthy met with Taiwan's president.
Right. So obviously China wasn't too happy with U.S. leaders getting close to Taiwan. They never like it when the U.S. doubles down on its support of Taiwan. But as you said, they also know that we are tied up in Ukraine, assets, money, weapons, military aid of all sorts going to Ukraine, and we are spread thin. And that is yet another vulnerability right now that China could take advantage of. If they want to at some point invade Taiwan, this would be the time to do so, to do it while the Biden administration is still in office, A, and B, while we are tied up in Ukraine with no end in sight of that war coming to any sort of close or resolution, but then taking advantage of the fact that these heightened tensions have to get to some sort of apex, right? So that's what we're basically waiting on here to see if they're going to play out the clock or if they're going to go for it. And it looks like China is trying to show the United States that they weren't too happy and that there will be consequences for that.
You know, with all of the support going to Ukraine over the past year, as you mentioned, I mean, Pentagon officials are realizing now that U.S. munition stockpiles are not nearly big enough. They're running low to take on China. Right.
Isn't that a shame? And not only to have this be a reality, but to say it out loud. Look how for years now we've been saying that the Pentagon and other military arms of the U.S. military have been worried about pronouns. China has been marching on and developing its assets. I mean, when you look at how serious China is and how whimsical the United States has been in its military development, and it's taking China seriously as a threat during this administration. We've been saying it, many experts bringing it to their attention. And now day after day, there are more and more reports saying the U.S. is not ready to take on China. And yet, when we say we're going to support Taiwan, what does that mean? That means we would have to take on China. So these are all realities that are coming to a front. And the fact that there's a headline there, that doesn't help our cause. All our enemies are watching. It doesn't help the cause that they're knowing how vulnerable we are militarily. The fact that all of our attention is on indicting a former president rather than being more serious about our foreign policy, about wanting to weaken our assets throughout the world instead of being America first in our foreign policy, et cetera. So definitely, again, ripple effect, consequences to a weak foreign policy that are playing out all across the world.
Let me ask you something. How much do you think the West can actually rely on Japan amid tensions with China to be a strong ally for the West?
Look, the entire region is on board, meaning South Korea, Japan, Taiwan. They obviously are all with us. But how much can we rely on them in terms of a military power, in terms of military might? It's wonderful that we have geographic partners that will, obviously take them on and support us in this endeavor. But it's never a good place to be in terms of being the United States, the world's biggest superpower, to say that we are not ready to take on China or that we do not have enough X, Y, and Z, and we would have to rely on regional partners to fill in the gaps. It's never a good place to be in. So I hope that this is a wake-up call to the White House, and it is something that we hope we don't have to get into, but something that we can be prepared for.
Lisa, the U.S. Justice Department has launched an investigation into the recent posting of classified Pentagon documents on various social media platforms. The 50 leaked documents were classified Ukraine war documents.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Who's running the show here, right? And why does the United States have so many enemies in terms of, is this internal? Is this external? Is this a hack? How did these papers get out? And why are there so many classified documents now coming to the forefront? Where were these papers? How did they get there? Now an investigation is being launched. But whenever they say investigation being launched, again, Hal, a vulnerability. It's very weak to say that we are now running after, to put the pieces together. Why did this happen to begin with, right? Why do we have so many vulnerabilities and blind spots when it comes to our intelligence? I don't know how many superpowers in the world are running around saying, "Oh no, we have our intel posted on the web or posted here, posted there." This is yet another vulnerability and something to look into. So I hope when they say this investigation is being launched, that they actually get to a point where they can stop the next one.
Iran is promising a strong and decisive response to Israel's recent airstrikes in Syria. They killed 2 Iranian military advisors. Lisa, the comments come amid an ongoing proxy war between Iran and Israel in Syria, where Iranian-backed forces have been coordinating terror attacks on the Jewish state.
Absolutely. Look, this is an interesting timing of such a threat, because Israel has been doing targeted just targeting specific places within Syria for years. That's been their way of setting the Iran regime back without getting into a full-fledged war between Iran and Israel. So they've been hitting quietly their assets there. Now, we're looking at 6 months of protests on the streets of Iran. We're hoping that the people of Iran are able to weaken their government, bring down their government, because as we've said many times, Hal, the Iran regime is good for nothing, right? They're egregious. They brutalize their own people. They put billions of dollars into global terror. They have blood on their hands. They have American, Canadian blood on their hands, European blood on their hands. So we're hoping that they become weakened. But in the interim, we know that the United States also said that they're trying to get another deal with Iran's regime. And then we know that they're also supporting, again, more terror against the state of Israel. They just were behind all those proxy attacks against U.S. assets in Syria and Iraq. So the fact, and the reason why I'm connecting all these dots is to get to this final point, is that the fact that the Iran regime is now making this threat means that they're sitting in a very comfortable spot, knowing that the United States is still after a deal with them, knowing that the United States is not condoning these terror attacks against Israel from Lebanon or from Gaza, knowing that they can do whatever they want and they can crack down on their protesters and crack down on their women for not wearing hijab, Islamic headscarf. So it's a big wake-up call to the White House to say, who are you trying to negotiate with? A bunch of bully terrorists that are bullying people, including Americans, all throughout the world. And now they have this breathing space, economic, military, etc., to come and make threats against Israel and the United States.
Now, amid escalating violence in the Middle East, Lisa, Hezbollah and Hamas leaders met in Beirut recently. The rocket attacks have been attributed to Hamas and have come from Lebanon, Syria, and Gaza.
Right. And a great segue there to say, the reason why these groups can unite is because their donor, their biggest sponsor is the same. It's the Iran regime. And that's why they are coming together, because of their main goal. So traditionally, these terror groups are always in competition for sponsorships, for donors, for recruits, right? To get people from Europe and Canada and the United States to go and fight alongside Hamas or Hezbollah or ISIS. And now you see them in cahoots. And that is because they are focused on the main goal, and that is diminishing Israel and and vis-a-vis the United States as well. This is, again, a huge message to us that they're getting a lot of money. Their goal is the same. They have weapons now. You're not seeing as many suicide bombings of Arabs going on to buses and into pizza shops to kill innocent Israelis that are just civilians living regular life. But in the past few attacks, we've seen them using handguns, going onto the streets, shooting people who are coming out of a bar. I mean, young people who have done nothing. They're just walking home from a night out with friends. Same goes with car rammings. If you have a car, you can kill people. That's a great deed you can do for your people. So the fact that they have become so bold and so brazen just points to the fact that they have the space to do so. There have been no punitive measures against them. And one other thing I want to point out is Donald Trump, under his presidency, he cut the funding to a lot of these Palestinian groups because of these pay-to-slay programs, where they were actually paying the families of martyrs, people who would kill Jews, would get paid a monthly salary. And that's why Donald Trump said, no more of this. We're not paying for terrorism with taxpayer money. President Biden reinstated that money. He started giving money back to these groups. You're seeing a lot more attacks, and that is, again, because of Iran's regime funding them, and because of President Biden, again, giving all this grant money to these groups.
Well, that's scary. Lisa, let's talk a bit about the protests taking place in France right now. More and more people are demanding that French President Emmanuel Macron resign. And a lot of it has to do with increasing the retirement age from 62 to 64. A lot of people are not happy with his leadership.
No, and a lot of people want to retire in Europe. If you've ever been to Europe, it's a pretty relaxed society, and they're very serious about their retirement. So, I mean, if you're in Canada or the United States, even people who are 70, 75, 80 are working, they're healthy, they don't mind. It's a different culture. The French are demanding that this does not happen. And you know what happens when people are in this perpetual protest mode is that they're not going to back down anytime soon. They want him gone. It's almost as if this very liberal, lax representative of the French people has fallen from their graces. So they're demanding that this reform not go through, that they get their retirement when they want it, and that things remain the same. So they continue to come out onto the streets, and this is throughout France. By the way, we're seeing it in multiple cities. It's not just in Paris, but yes, this is ongoing.
Bringing things a little closer to home now, Border Patrol agents have apprehended more than 10,000 migrants. That includes some sex offenders, 4 who had arrest warrants, and 1 who's even a gang member. Lisa, there were also a lot of illegal drugs and guns confiscated at the U.S.-Mexico border.
Yeah, this is a daily thing that goes on. And if you've been following the fallout at the border, you have Border Patrol saying something very different than the White House. You have a very difficult time for Border Patrol to be recruiting new people. The salaries are low, the demands are high, the stresses are high. They don't have the right resources or tools to stop this flow. It's like a bandage for a huge hemorrhage, and they cannot they can't contain it. I mean, who would want to even work such a job, a thankless job that is dangerous and, of course, difficult and very challenging. So this is a daily reality for those who are at the border. I know many reporters have gone down there to do a walk along. These numbers don't lie. It tells us a full story. And think about all those who are not stopped, who cannot be vetted. I know, Hal, you and I have many times talked about the fact that so many that are on the global terror list have been found at the border. Think about, again, those who have not been or not on the list, or have not been caught, or who have not been vetted. And we know bad actors are using the border. We're not saying that these bad actors are coming from the South American countries, but that bad actors from other parts of the world are using this vulnerable border to get through. And as it pertains to you, all of you in Canada, they're continuing north in many cases. And now we have a problem with our northern border as well, with these migrants traveling into Canada. So look, it's contagious, right? And I think, again, this bad foreign policy, it has a ripple effect. It has many consequences. I know the mayor of New York is fed up, even though he is very pro-migrant and very lax immigration laws. But now when he sees the reality of it in front of his eyes, when he sees how much money and resources have to go towards housing these migrants and placing them and getting them, set up, he's also trying to bust them out. So it's not a problem that anybody wants to inherit. And again, when it comes to the logistics, when it comes to the reality of it, people have a very different view on immigration than when those policymakers sit at that table and in Congress.
American correspondent and host of the Foreign Desk, Lisa Daftari, thanks so much for joining us today from Los Angeles.
My pleasure.